Picture a map of Europe with a fear gauge switched on like a thermometer that measures anxiety instead of temperature. In Warsaw and Tallinn, it's off the charts. In Madrid and Rome, it's barely warm. That's the honest answer to the question in the title. Does Europe fear Russia? Yes or no, depending on which Europe you're asking. In this video, we will break down why one continent can simultaneously feel like a war is coming and feel like that war is somebody else's problem. My name is Anastasia, I'm 19-year-old entrepreneur and I run this channel about history and politics. Don't forget to subscribe and hit like. This fear wasn't born in 2022, it's much older. After World War II, Europe was cut in half by the Iran Curtain. The eastern half, Poland, the Baltic states, Hungary, Czechoslovakia fell under direct Soviet military and political control for almost 50 years. People inside that eastern bloc didn't all feel the same way about it. Some were genuine believers in the social system, others were closer to resignation than hatred. But two moments stuck in the region's memory especially hard: Soviet tanks crushing the uprising in Budapest in 1956 and the invasion of Prague in 1968, when these countries' attempts to chart their own path ended in Moscow's military intervention. These specific episodes, more than any abstract dislike of communism, became living proof for an entire generation that their country's sovereignty could be put in question at any moment. Western Europe lived through a different history. France, Spain, Italy were never under direct Soviet military occupation. For them, the Cold War was an important but abstract geopolitical game, not a personal trauma. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary almost immediately declared their intent to integrate with the West, signing the Visegrad Declaration as early as February 1991. But the actual process of joining NATO took years, not months. Poland, the Czech Republic, and Hungary only officially became members in 1999. The Baltic states joined in 2004. This was a long, sometimes difficult path through 90s diplomacy, not a spontaneous mass request right after the USSR fell apart. NATO is a written promise from over 30 countries that an attack on one of them counts as an attack on all of them, Article 5 of the Alliance's founding treaty. NATO's eastward expansion through the 90s and 2000s became one of the biggest sources of tension with Moscow. From Poland's, Estonia's point of view, joining NATO was a real insurance against history repeating itself. From the Kremlin's point of view, the alliance was steadily creeping right up to Russia's border, step by step, decade by decade. Both interpretations are true at the same time, which is exactly why this conflict of interest is so hard to resolve. If you have watched this far, you probably like my content. You can support it in dollars, euros, or even rubles in any currency via the link in the description. And by the way, I also build websites, apps, and startups, so if you have a business you want to improve online, that link is in the description too. Now, let's continue. According to Pew Research survey conducted in spring 2026 among nearly 45,000 people across 37 countries, attitudes towards Russia are negative almost everywhere in Europe. Just to be clear, this is specifically about attitudes toward the Russian state, not toward Russian people. At least 60% in every European country survived to view Russia negatively, but a negative attitude isn't the same thing as an actual fear of attack. Poland borders Russia's Kaliningrad region and Belarus, Moscow's closest ally. Polish officials openly talk about growing pressure, provocations, and sabotage from Russia through both military and civilian channels, including the use of migrant flows as a pressure toward the border. For Poles, the threat isn't hypothetical, it's physically standing on the other side of the fence. Spain spent around 1.2% of GDP on defense for years, the lowest share among all NATO countries, and only recently officially raised that to around 2%, partly by reclassifying spending categories that weren't counted before. Spain is the only alliance member that openly refused to sign on to the new 5% on GDP target by 2035, agreed to by the rest of NATO at the Hague summit in 2025, and Spain's prime minister called the target unrealistic for the country. Italy kept defense spending nearly flat for decades, and according to analysts, it will need to increase spending more than 3 times over just to reach the new NATO target. For Southern Europe, Russia stays a problem on the other side of the continent, not a neighbor across the fence. There is a third camp too. Hungary and Slovakia keep relying on Russian energy even after 2022, despite official statements about diversifying. Hungary's prime minister has openly resisted supporting Ukraine and backing energy sanctions, creating friction not just with the West but with fellow Visegrad Group neighbors, including Poland. Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022 noticeably shifted military budgets and defense policy across nearly every European country, fraught at very different speeds. Collective defense spending among European NATO countries rose by roughly 20% compared to the old target set back in 2014. Poland now spends around 4% of GDP on defense, proportionally more than the United States itself. Estonia has already hit 7% if you count defense in the broad sense. And the country's prime minister said Estonia will hit NATO's new targets 9 years ahead of schedule. In 2025, NATO agreed The Hague on a new target 5% of GDP on defense and a related project by 2035. Separately, the EU agreed on its own 5-year plan for full military self-sufficiency by 2030, according to Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk. But not every country is moving at the same pace. Spain keeps insisting it will only hit the standard NATO target of 2% by 2029. Czechia risks falling below 2% in 2026. Italy and France are running into poor financial constraints. They simply don't have spare room in the budget to sharply ramp up military spending even where the political will exists. The US Institute for Security Studies in its 2026 risk report names a hybrid attack on European Union critical infrastructure as the top risk of the year. A May ESFIR survey of nearly 20,000 people across 15 countries found that most people in almost every European country survived now believe the US wouldn't come to help if attacked, a shift that happened in just 6 months. But I don't think Putin will attack Europe anytime soon. According to the Royal United Services Institute in London, at the current rate of attrition, Russia's replaceable military equipment will run out by the end of 2026 or early 2027. The European Union's own Institute for Security Studies acknowledges that a direct NATO-Russia military clash remains unlikely, precisely because the alliance still holds real deterrent power. One reader at The Hill put it bluntly, given Russia's current weakened state, a full clash with NATO isn't just unlikely, it's close to impossible, because it will be unaffordably expensive and demographically unsustainable for Russia itself. But not everyone agrees. Dutch military intelligence warned in a 2026 report that if the war in Ukraine ends on terms favorable to Moscow, Russia could rebuild enough capability for a limited regional clash with NATO within about a year. German officials separately point to possible clash closer to 2028 or 2029. So here is my position. Right now in 2026, Russia physically doesn't have the resources to attack Europe. That's not a question of the Kremlin's goodwill, it's raw military math. And honestly, why would Russia even attack Europe in the first place? Although people ask that same question about Ukraine too. So does Europe fear Russia? There isn't one Europe, there are at least 3. Eastern Europe, which lives with this fear every single day because it remembers 1956 and 1968 and physically borders the threat. Southern Europe, for which Russia stays a secondary item on the agenda despite 4.5 years of full-scale war right on the continent. And a small group of countries like Hungary, which for economic and political reasons doesn't want to join the general consensus of alarm at all. The one thing nearly every European country agrees on, based on the polling, is a growing sense that relying solely on American security guarantees isn't an option anymore, and that Europe will need to learn to defend itself regardless of how afraid of Russia it actually is today. Let me know what you think in the comments and drop your ideas for what I should cover next.
Bye-bye, Russia! Bye-bye, Russia!